Alright, this one's on, mostly on cruelty. Cruelty towards those who are different. And normalizing. And your assumptions. Me, I have to control my Tourette syndrome 24 hours a day so people don't think I'm on drugs. I have to control my autism 24 hours a day, or people treat me like I'm on drugs. I'm not allowed to suffer from sensory overload because the byproducts of which get me punished. So I can't have Tourette syndrome or you punish me. I can't have autism or you punish me. Now this sexism stuff, it's alright for a woman, but it's not alright for a man stuff. You need to man up stuff. I am manning up. I'm also suicidal because I don't have the help that I need. Dealing with people who go out of their way not to understand or are so inebriated that, well, any of you who have worked in the field of addiction recovery, you know what I'm talking about. Now, once you get into the recovery field, you start getting into people who are willing to admit that they have a problem. And they're willing to work on it. But when they're not willing to do that, and you're dealing with them anyway, it's a completely different story. So by the time you get into working with addiction recovery, you're lucky. You're not dealing with those people at their worst, when they're snapping at anybody who says anything about their alcoholism, or their drug use, or, well, it could be anything. Some people are addicted to cigarettes. Some people are addicted to sex or masturbation. But then the rules are different. They're different. See, before somebody admits that they have a problem, which I have admitted I have a problem. However, my problem isn't drugs. But before you get to the part where somebody is admitting that they have a problem, it's everyone else's fault but their own. When you're suffering from sensory overload, it is everyone's fault. It truly is. Because they're not understanding, they're not listening, it makes it worse. And then because it's making it worse, you're trying not to react to that. You're trying not to have an even worse meltdown, because you know that if you have a meltdown, people are going to judge you harshly in a way that they don't want to be judged. Now, when you're dealing with addicts, you get into a much worse situation. That's because not only are they not willing to admit they have a problem, but they're also snapping at you. And if they want to help you, but they're drunk, they're not going to be capable at all. And that presents a major issue, because they're only making it worse. Whether that's their intention or not, it doesn't make a difference. Oh, my nose itches. But you can't really say anything about it. You just have to take it. You can't say anything to an alcoholic about their drug addiction. You can't say anything to a heroin addict about their heroin addiction. You can't say anything to a meth addict about their meth addiction, or you're a terrible person. Meanwhile, you're suffering from sensory overload because of the way that alcoholics and meth addicts and heroin addicts act. But you're not allowed to respond to that. You're not allowed to respond to those stimuli. You have to pretend that they don't exist. Meanwhile, it's in your face, especially when you're in a subservient position. When the alcoholic or the heroin addict or the meth addict have the roof, and that roof keeps you safe from victimization by people who hate the homeless, then you're in that situation. You're in that situation of, all right, do I take the abuse or do I leave? Now, not all people who are addicted are abusive. Not all of them. But that also depends on whether or not they feel challenged. If you say anything about their addictions, you run the risk of them feeling challenged and getting hateful and angry and spiteful and blaming everything on you. And if they're not willing to admit that they're having an issue with drinking, well, they'll blame everything else on you. Everything is your fault. It's your fault that you're suffering from sensory overload. Never mind the fact that it's the things that they're doing that you're reacting to, and that's sensory overload. Now, people, when you commit suicide because people won't listen, because they are cruel to you, when you let them know that you're suicidal. See, that's the thing. When I let Natalie know that I was suicidal, she didn't care. She was cruel. Her sister was cruel. Maddie Bowe was cruel. Their friends were cruel. People turned a blind eye to me over things that I didn't do, and I never got the opportunity to defend myself. Now, with Shannon Alvarado, I'm going to give her the chance to defend herself. She doesn't need to. Neither does Rick McCormick. The thing is that while I was there, I spent a lot of time defending Rick. When Shannon was drunk, when she was sober, there was no reason to defend him because she wasn't drunk. She wasn't in that paranoid frame of mind where she thinks that Rick is only there trying to take advantage of her and take everything that she's got, which is her mentality when she's drunk. Or he was gone for 15 minutes longer than she expected him to be, so he must be cheating and she's going to go off for a week. But not the whole week. During the morning, in the afternoon, and early evening, she's sober. And we're all getting along fine. The only thing we have to worry about is her daughter throwing a tantrum and biting and pulling hair and things like that. But a lot of that is because of the way that Rick and Shannon react to it. They scream and shout. Rick does it aggressively, and Shannon does it defensively when they're being attacked. But also, her daughter wants positive attention, but she's learned that she's not going to get positive attention. When she's being calm and fine and dandy, she doesn't get any attention. When she's throwing things around the house, that's when Shannon pays attention. So for her daughter, it's a very difficult situation because she wants attention too, but she's not getting positive attention. She only gets attention when she's throwing things. And because she only gets attention when she throws things and she wants that attention, she starts throwing things. Taking stuff from in the living room and stuffing it all in the bathtub in the bathroom. And Shannon doesn't understand this. So she's screaming. And although it's not me that's getting screamed at, and it's understandable why she's screaming at her daughter, it's the fact that that screaming is happening. And also the fact that because of that screaming, I can't make the phone calls that I need to make. Now, that doesn't make Shannon a bad person. Not even close. That doesn't make Rick a bad person. I mean, hell, between him and Chris, I just felt bad for the guys. But, unlike Shannon, Rick and Chris both took the time to listen to me, without talking over me, to try to understand. And they did a great job, both of them, by the way. And both of them, the things that I have to say about Shannon, both of these men had the same things to say, that, they understand that it's the alcohol. But trying to explain sensory overload to them, how this byproduct of the alcoholism is what's sending me into sensory overload. I'm already overloaded at the point that I got to her house. I'm overwhelmed. There's too much going on. and a safe environment. If there's screaming going on, then I'm suffering from sensory overload. Of course, I'm trying not to melt down. Plus, I'm stuck in a subservient position. Now, when people get to the point that they're suicidal, it really gets to be complicated. Because people want to tell them, oh, well, if you were really suicidal, you'd have found a way to do it already. They don't think about how that's dismissive, how dismissive it is. Someone is reaching out to you for help and you're dismissing them outright, like Stephen McMillian, aka Mobley. They're reaching out to you and you're dismissing them outright, letting them know that you don't actually care about them. You just don't want to hear it. And I get that. When I hear somebody say that they're suicidal, I want to talk them out of it. But also, I understand that there's things that need to happen in order for them to not feel suicidal. Like a lot of people who lose their children, they need somebody who's going to be loving, caring, and understanding. For Leah Plunkett, she has Ken Wilson, and Ken Wilson is extremely understanding. Extremely. I mean, to the point that he bends over backwards to try to fulfill her every will and whim, even if it means ripping people off. Even if it means spending money that needs to go to bills on things that Leah wants. Wants, not needs. But it's because he's hoping that if he gives in to her demands, that it'll help her. But then she ends up, you see, unlike Ken is not a selfish person. Not even close. But Leah is an extremely selfish person. So for him, the more he gives her, the more she wants, the more she expects. And then it gets to the point where he's spending money that isn't his. It's not his to spend. Now, as far as my issues over at Ken and Leah's went, it didn't have hardly anything to do with Ken. It was almost entirely Leah. But also there's the fact that Ken is with Leah. So he wants to defend Leah. Dawn is in a subservient position. She doesn't want to hear the screaming first thing in the morning, which is why she came out and assaulted me that morning, the 26th of December of 2017. When it comes down to it, a lot of these people that claim that they understood, they went out of their way to do things that, if they understood, then they would have known how hurtful these things are. And they did do them intentionally. Like the man up thing. See, while Natalie is playing victim, and she has all sorts of help, I'm actually being victimized at that point. I'm asking for help, and everybody is being dismissive. I must be wrong because I'm autistic. I must be wrong because I have a penis. It is wrong for me to have emotions because of my genitalia, because of my looks. Also, because of the genitalia that I have and because of my looks. It's okay to victimize me because of my monetary status and because there's nobody who's going to stand up for my rights. It's okay to do these things to me, and this is why I get victimized. Now, I'm literally screaming out for help. I mean, people are assaulting me and threatening my life, and I'm getting dismissed. Outright. And I'm asking for help. I'm asking for these people to call off the dogs. Just tell them the truth. Now, then there's the fears of others that I have to contend with. Like, I have to understand that with Natalie, the reason that she wasn't going to go down to the police station to meet with me is because she is afraid that I'm going to bring up the fact that she's a heroin addict and that a lot of this comes from her heroin addiction. Just like at Shannon Alvarado's, a lot of the issues that I had there, they stem from the fact that she is an alcoholic. But she doesn't want to admit it. It's very difficult for her to do that, to admit that she could possibly have an issue or have a problem with that, or that that issue or problem could possibly affect those around her. For me, I understand how sensory overload affects me and those around me. I have to hide it as a result. But she lives in that house. It's her position. She doesn't have to be subservient. But then there's also the fact that Rick, he jumped through all those hoops and basically got himself screwed. And then she's trying to kick him out of the house after he did what she wanted. And she kicked him out of the house probably... She said that he needed to leave at least 150 times. I mean, she said it a lot. She would get drunk. She would start downing on his character. And yes, he's understandably and justifiably going to be defensive about it. But also, I understand his position as well. I have to. Now, with Dan Faber, instead of communicating with me in an efficient manner, well, he wasn't willing to. Now, that's the thing. Once you've gone out of your way not to listen, and then you finally make the time after you've already torn somebody down and made a bunch of very cruel and mean judgments and assumptions, and you keep throwing that in somebody's face in a way that they're not able to defend themselves against, it's difficult. Because then when you finally do call them, they've got all of this stuff that they took wrong in texting that they're wanting to throw in your face, that they're wanting to be cruel about because they took it wrong because you didn't type perfectly. And that's why talking to someone is important. But also, instead of talking to them when they're having an issue with sensory overload, or pushing them to sensory overload and then calling them, you need to understand that person. You need to not do that while they're suffering from sensory overload. When I was making that video in Montana a few months ago, the last thing I needed was for Shannon to call me up and talk over me again. Now, at her house, I had to take it. I had to allow her to do it, because if she kicks me out, unlike Rick, I'm going to leave. But I had nowhere to go, so I had to be subservient and I had to take it. Now, is this because Shannon's a bad person? No, it's because she's an alcoholic. She's paranoid because she's alcoholic. Now, the difference is justifiable fears versus drug-induced fears. See, my fears are from experience. From my experience, alcoholics act like she does. Alcoholics act like Teresa does. They want to help by basically using you as a therapist. I don't need her to use me as a therapist. I need her to listen to understand. But she goes out of her way not to. And that's not a decision that I made. I didn't choose for her to be an alcoholic. And I didn't choose to suffer from sensory overload. It's a major issue because people push you to it, don't understand that they pushed you to it, or they do it intentionally so that they can play victim, play like they didn't do anything wrong. That's why, even though Rick is very hateful and angry at me, I still stick up for him. I understand his position. But does he understand mine? Is he willing to try? Is he going to make the effort? Or is he too angry to do so? With Shannon, just trying to get her to stay sober long enough to listen. But she can't. She wants things done, but then when I start working on those things, it's story time. Not just story time, it's I need to vent about Rick, and I need to vent about Chris. And although I wholeheartedly believe that both Rick and Chris are victimized as a result of this, both Rick and Chris are in positions where they're trying to help this woman, but she is too drunk to register it. And she's, downing on them both. I mean, she was talking trash on Chris. He's working on her house. She said that she would pay him. He's not even 10 feet from her, working on her house, working on her counters. And she's talking trash about him to me. Because she's drunk. Anybody who's sober is going to reasonably understand that that's probably not the right thing to do. And justifiably, Chris got up and left. But you know what? He understands that it's the alcohol. And he continued to come back and try to help her with her house. He's frustrated at the way that she's acting. He's frustrated at the fact that he's trying his best and it's not good enough for her. So he doesn't come back every single day like she wants him to. Who would? Who wants to come back every day to work on somebody's house who's verbally abusing you and talking shit about you like you're not even there? And then there's the expectations. It's all right for Shannon to be that way because she's drunk. It's her house, so she's allowed. For me, I'm not allowed to suffer from sensory overload because I'm at her house. I'm not allowed to have a reaction to that abuse, and it is abusive. And it is frequent, and it is often, and it is loud. So for a lot of folks looking at this, they might think that it was just Shannon screaming. It wasn't. Rick, he gets a lot louder than Shannon does when he screams. But also, he's screaming for the same reason that I do. Shannon's not hearing a word that he has to say because she's drunk. And he's having his manhood challenged, basically is how most of y'all would put it. But really, it's his character that's being challenged. She's accusing him of things that he's not doing, and she's not allowing him to defend himself against these accusations. If he tries, then she speaks over him, or she yells over him, and it gets to the point where he's yelling as well. And because it's her house, she could easily call the cops and play victim like Rick had done something terrible and wrong because he screamed back. He's not allowed to because it's her house. He has to just take it. If he doesn't just take it, then she kicks him out. But he doesn't leave, which is where he is doing something wrong. Because legally, that is her house. If she tells you to leave, you need to leave. Now, when it comes to leaving people alone, if Shannon kicked Rick out, and Rick were to leave and go somewhere else, and then that somewhere else that he went, he's got people threatening and harassing him over things that these people aren't aware of what's going on. These people aren't aware of the crap that he's had to go through at Shannon's house. They just want to judge him harshly because Shannon said so. And she's a woman, so she must be right. It was her house, so she must be right. She's not willing to admit that she's an alcoholic, so if he says anything about her being an alcoholic, then he must be trying to pose it off like it's all her fault. But that's just not the case. Now, Stephen McMillian isn't the only person to be dismissive. So you guys all care and you say, well, I wish I would have done something. I wish I would have done something when somebody commits suicide. But see, when somebody's asking for your help because they're suicidal, you dismiss them. Tell them that they're not suicidal. Basically, you're saying, I dare you to do it. That is what you are doing at that point in time. I dare you to kill yourself. You won't do it. If you were going to kill yourself, you'd have found a way to do it already. Well, suicide isn't easy. When I took all of those pills, I didn't intend on ever waking up. I was pissed off because after 45 minutes, I wasn't dead and I wasn't asleep. I took enough sleeping pills, I should have been asleep. But I also took enough caffeine pills that I wasn't going to sleep. My heart's beating a million beats a minute. And yes, I understand that it's not literally a million beats a minute. So those of you who are just going out of your way to find a reason why, oh, well, he's lying because he said a million beats a minute. If his heart was beating a million beats a minute, it would have exploded. So you're going out of your way to miss the point at that point. And that's the thing also. A lot of people, they want to go out of their way to completely miss the point. They know what point I'm trying to make, but they don't want to admit to it. Like with Amanda Engellein. With the, oh, well, I haven't watched Game of Thrones in over a year. I don't care. The fact is, that was your downtime when I was there. That's why I bring up Game of Thrones. If your downtime would have been playing Scrabble, I would have brought that up. Now, Scrabble, I would have been fine with. I love Scrabble. It's interactive. But that's not what it was. It wasn't Scrabble. Like with her mom. Her mom was allowed to talk nonstop about this earthquake guy. And Shannon, well, she's allowed to talk nonstop about how Rick is a terrible person and how Chris is a terrible person. Meanwhile, Rick took time off of his work to actually help Shannon with her daughter. And those issues with her daughter, most of them stem from Shannon's alcoholism. Most of her arguments with Rick stem from her problems with alcoholism. Her inability to hear anything that I have to say and actually have it register stems from her alcoholism. But I'm not allowed to say that or I'm a terrible person because she was trying to help me. She couldn't help me because she couldn't stay sober. She couldn't help herself because she couldn't stay sober. She couldn't stop being mean to Rick because she couldn't stay sober. Now with her daughter, there's 3 different people in the house who are dealing with her, 3 different adults who are dealing with her daughter and her daughter assaulting them in different ways. Rick gets aggressive and grabs her daughter by the throat. Ah! And then there's Shannon. She's like, help! Help! And then there's me. When she grabs a hold of my beard, I grab a hold of her hand and I pull it off my beard. Or I hold it to my beard so that she's not pulling on it. And she lets go on her own. I'm not aggressive. I'm not screaming for help. Because I know that that noise is something that is going to affect her daughter greatly. And it's going to increase the activities that her daughter is doing that are negative. I understand that screaming at her daughter is just going to increase the activity. I know that getting aggressive with her daughter is just going to increase the activity. The person that her daughter went after the most while I was there was Rick. Now her daughter is aware that she's not going to be able to win against Rick. She already knows this. But she continues to go at Rick. Now, why is this? Because Rick is aggressive. Because she doesn't like that aggression. There are arguments every night. At night, that's when Shannon's daughter is the worst. Because at night is when Shannon is screaming about things to Rick. At night is when she is showing that she cares about everything else except for her daughter. And we all know that's not the case. Shannon loves her daughter. She does. She doesn't understand her daughter. She doesn't pay positive attention to her daughter. But when her daughter is doing something wrong, Shannon has all sorts of time to pay attention to her, to scream at her, to be angry with her. Positivity. A positive environment. Now, because Shannon doesn't want to admit that she has a problem or even recognize the issues that it creates because she won't stop drinking, well, it's better for her to drug her daughter. This is how she deals with how her daughter reacts to the environment. I'm going to drug my daughter for the environment that I created and how she reacts to the environment that I created. By my drinking, and by my inattentive nature when I'm drinking, and by the screaming that I do, my daughter reacts to this in a negative way. Well, obviously, those are negative things being screamed at. Whether you're screaming at her or screaming at Rick, it doesn't matter. Shannon didn't scream at me while I was there. Well, she did. She did scream a couple of times, but that's because she was frustrated, and I understood. Instead of taking it defensively the way that she takes it, I understood that she was frustrated, and I made an attempt to understand why she was frustrated. Most of the time, it's because she was drunk and paranoid. Now, for me, being suicidal, having people tell me, basically challenge me and try to, what they're doing is pushing me to it by making no effort to understand. They don't want to listen because I'm suicidal. So I beg them to kill me. And then their excuse for not listening is that I begged them to kill me. No, I begged you to kill me because you wouldn't listen. Because I need someone to understand instead of judging me harshly. But they don't judge me the same way that they judge themselves. They don't want to be challenged, but they want to challenge me. They don't want people dismissing their emotions, but they dismiss mine. They want me to listen to them, yet make no time to listen to me. When they speak, I listen. When I speak, they speak over me. The issues that I have with Shannon, Rick has those same issues with Shannon. That's why they fight. They always fight over her alcoholism, how she acts when she's drunk. So, her paranoia is justifiable because it's her house. My paranoia is not justifiable, even though it comes from experience of dealing with alcoholics, dealing with people on meth, dealing with people who are on heroin, dealing with people who are suicidal. I know how to react and how to interact with those people to help better their lives. And if I'm in that situation, their lives do need to be improved. Otherwise, it's going to affect me greatly. Now, before all of this happened with Miss Natalie in Virginia, I was able to walk away from situations where it was a no-win situation. At Shannon's, what was supposed to happen didn't happen. Graham was supposed to send me money, or was supposed to give me money when I was in Colorado so that I could take care of my vehicle stuff. But then on that Friday, he wasn't able to pay up like he said that he would. But instead of saying that he didn't have the money and understanding the situation that he put me in by not keeping his promises, he got defensive when I said something about it. When I got to Shannon's, I didn't plan on being at her house for 2 months. Graham again had made a promise. He had promised me that he would send my stuff to me on Friday. But he didn't send me that stuff on Friday. And the whole time I'm at Shannon's listening to all of this screaming going on, wanting to blow my head off because she's not going to stop drinking and being abusive. And it is abusive, by the way. I'm stuck in that situation, hoping that Graham is eventually going to send this stuff. So finally, 6 weeks after he said that he was going to send it, he finally did. Well, Shannon said that she was going to sit down and work with me on it, but she couldn't stay sober. Just like when it came to working on her tile, she couldn't stay sober. She gets sidetracked very easily. Alcoholics do that. Most of you have been at a party where somebody is friggin' so drunk they should probably be sleeping it off. where they're stuck on something and they're angry about something, and you're like, this is so trivial. But then you're not allowed to say something. Because if you tell them, hey, you're being unreasonable, then they stop directing it where they were directing it, and they direct it at you. Me, I didn't want Shannon directing that at me, so I bypassed and sidestepped it. Every time she asked me what to do with Rick, I would tell her, wait till in the morning. Make a decision in the morning. Because I knew that in the morning she was going to be sober. In the morning she is going to be reasonable. She's still going to be overwhelmed, but she's not understanding that all of the things that her daughter does are reactions to Shannon. They're reactions to Shannon's yelling. They're reactions to Shannon ignoring her unless she is doing something wrong. They're reactions to the environment, and the people in that environment are a part of it. So her daughter is having sensory overload, same as me. But the difference is, her daughter is more frustrated because her daughter can't speak it. Her daughter can't speak. So she can't explain to Shannon that, Shannon, you're fucking scaring me.